We're here July 28th. I'm so excited for the first hybrid version of the AWS HSV meetup. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to see an awesome demo of what we call the Cloud Development Kit. So the CDK, if it's not part of your vocabulary, it should be. It's what the cool kids do now for provisioning cloud infrastructure on AWS. So I can't wait to show it to you. I hope that you feel empowered to go try some things yourself. It's not scary. I'm going to give you all sorts of ways to get started so that you can actually use some sample code and feel like a genius in like less than 10 minutes, which is always a plus. And all of the links, you're going to see a lot of links in here. I have it available as a PDF, so you don't have to take pictures or feverishly try to write stuff down. And I will try to post that in the Zoom after we're done. I'm going to make you wait for it. So, all right, let's see if this will activate here. Okay, so who am I? Several of you know me. I've been in Huntsville for 26 years, I believe now, a long time. I'm originally from Wyoming and ended up in Huntsville a long time ago. Met my awesome hubby here, and so I've been here ever since. I have done everything from Linux system admin, storage system administration, software development, DevOps engineering, cloud engineering. I've been IT director, solutions architect, you name it. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in data centers and lots of history there. But I joined AWS in 2019, pretty much the dream job, and have been loving it ever since. There's my contact info. And I would love for you to reach out to me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected, and you can kind of keep up with some of the cool things I'm doing. I'm involved in some global reach groups at AWS now, and so I have some exciting info on there from time to time. Awesome. So we are here about the CDK. So some of you might be familiar with HashiCorp Terraform, AWS CloudFormation. Hopefully those are familiar to you. They are tools used to automate the deployment of resources in your AWS and other cloud accounts. So we are here to kind of talk about the CDK, Cloud Development Kit, and see how it fits into the ecosystem of all of that. So what's the big deal about it? Why am I talking about it? Isn't CloudFormation awesome? Yes, but now we're going to see what else you can do here with CDK. So we have to kind of appreciate where we came from. So down on the bottom of the food chain, we've got those manual processes. I think we've all pretty much been there. I know I have, using a wiki, post-it note, whatever, playbook to deploy resources. So of course, some of the downsides there, right, may not be accurate. You probably have noticed it's missing some steps, or you have to track down the original author. You have to track down somebody who's used it. And it's hard to like scale and automate with something like that. So it's a very manual process. Along comes scripting. Cool. So something like Bash, shell scripting, definitely helps with representing the steps as steps in the script and can be saved. So it has some big advantages there. But at the same time, it has a disadvantage when you go to scale. And a lot of that is like, if it's too complex, it's not exactly a framework. So, right. So Bash is not, it's not a deployment framework. It's just a scripting language. So it still had some drawbacks there, but some improvements. The important next step, and you see CloudFormation and Terraform listed there, are the introduction of infrastructure provisioning engines. So that's the examples shown there. They can handle rollbacks, state management, drift detection, error management. So huge advantage there as you're deploying your functions. And the ease of use led to increased adoption of infrastructure as code. So infrastructure as code became more and more popular. Folks were learning how to use these tools. A bummer with it though is that they come with their own like JSON or YAML or HCL, their own language that you had to learn to write CloudFormation or Terraform. And a lot of developers just aren't familiar with that. They know Python, right? They know C#, they know JavaScript, but they don't know those languages. So it was still hindering the adoption a little bit, even as awesome as those are. So we move into generators like Troposphere and GoFormation. They're all about generating the code for you. So you didn't have to know the ins and outs of writing every single line of a CloudFormation template. It could be generated. So that was definitely a step in the right direction. And finally, the abstractions like the AWS CDK. That's all about using the classes and methods and the programming language that you are used to and defining everything in that programming language, but having the outcome still be a CloudFormation template. So it has the same outcome, but much more comfortable for your developers. And that is why CDK is becoming so popular. So let's take a further look at the CDK. It is an open source software development framework used to model and provision your cloud application resources using familiar programming languages. So from the top down, we've got Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, C#, and Go, which you'll see some examples out there. It's coming soon. So all of those are supported. So this is huge. Now we're sort of bringing all of these developers who know these languages together, through this tool. Some of the advantages are you work with your familiar languages. Like I said before, the classes and methods, the linting tools, your favorite IDE, all of that can be used with CDK. And we provide some very sane defaults. So you can define things with the minimal amount of words necessary and instructions. The defaults work for so many use cases. So you'll see that in the examples. And it doesn't take a lot of research and going through hordes of documentation before you can get started doing something really meaningful. So that's a huge advantage, taking advantage of the defaults. The main components of the CDK are the core framework, the construct library, and the CLI. With the core framework, you can create the structure for your app and your stacks. So when we say stacks here, that's a one-to-one reference to CloudFormation stacks, if you're familiar with how that works. And then resources are provisioned as a result of that. It's good practice to divide the resources, kind of like you see there, into stacks that have different life cycles. So something like a dev or a test or production, that's still good practice there. You could have one stack for network infrastructure, such as a VPC, for example, and you could have another stack for like Elastic Container Service. Elastic Container Service, and yet another stack maybe for the app that's running in that ECS cluster. The construct library is a set of components, and it's crafted by AWS to create resources for our specific services. So if you see, I know it's really small there, but you see familiar AWS resources like S3 for object storage. You see Lambda there, so you can see some of those in that diagram. And those are provisioned via the construct library. So that helps to decouple libraries and use only what you need. So it's a big concept to kind of get your head wrapped around, is that the minimalist approach here. Use only what you need and keep everything as small as possible. So the CLI is the other piece of this, and it interacts with the core framework to actually initialize the project structure. So the CLI, we're going to see it in action. It's cool. It's where you go to actually say, I want to synthesize CloudFormation template, and I want to deploy this in my account. So those are commands that we're going to run in the CLI. So all three of those are important pieces. And we're going to take a look at my sample code that I'll show you, and we'll see the construct library. We'll see what that looks like. And when I say S3 bucket and I say Lambda, you'll actually see what that looks like in the right format to make sense as we provision these during the demo. So here's a typical development workflow. You identify your stacks and constructs in your source code. And to do that, you run CDK init. Very simple command. Of course, this is after you install CDK. You run the init, it creates a new project. So it's going to give you a project structure in the directory that you're working in. Then you head over to the CDK CLI step here, and you do like an npm run build. If you're using TypeScript, for example, you would use this command. It's not going to be the same if you're using Python or some other language, but this is an example here with TypeScript. You do this to see if you have any syntactical issues, any errors, and what's wrong with my code. So the run build command is something you can do multiple times, and you don't have to actually do that. I have optional listed there because if you choose to skip that step and you just synthesize, it'll build it for you. But you might get errors. It's a nice good practice to run the build manually and just take a look at that step. But basically, you're trying to get to the synthesize command. So CDK synth, that's where the magic happens. It reads the code that you have crafted, and out pops a CloudFormation template. And we're going to see how magical this is, because it doesn't take very many lines of Python, for example, to generate a really long CloudFormation template. And anyone who's generated those from scratch can appreciate getting from several hundred lines to a couple dozen lines. That's a big deal. And that's what the CDK allows you to do. You can also run what we call the diff. So this is a good one just to be cautious, to know how your environment is going to change. Like, what is going to be the difference in my environment from what it is right now in my AWS account to when I deploy this CDK environment. So it'll tell you what's going to change. And if there are any surprises, something you did not intend to happen, of course, you would go back and fix that. Bootstrap command is next. You need to bootstrap the environment in certain situations. This creates a bucket in your AWS account, an S3 bucket for CDK, kind of to use on the back end. You don't really ever need to know it's there. But if you're going to be pulling down resources from your local system, like a Docker container, or for example, like a Lambda function that's defined on your local system, then you need to bootstrap the environment. CDK has to have somewhere to save it, to upload that to before it deploys. So that's the bootstrap command. If you forget, it has a nice reminder. It's an ugly red text that comes back, and it's like, you can't do this, you need to bootstrap. That's what it's talking about. Finally, we get to the rocket ship down there at the bottom, the deploy command. It's going to spit out some warnings, hey, are you sure you want to do this? This is going to affect IAM. This is going to make some resources. Are you sure you understand? Then you just type yes, and it goes. So when I say it goes, I mean the CloudFormation template that was generated gets executed as a CloudFormation stack. So that is what the deploy command is all about. If you are using sample code, even if it's really simple, make sure you read the output from CDK deploy, because you just want to make sure no one had any surprises in there. So it's a good double check on what's about to happen in your account. And once you do that, then you provision your cloud resources, and everything is visible in CloudFormation. So you go to CloudFormation in your AWS account, just like always. And the biggest difference is you didn't start with a CloudFormation template, you started with CDK, but you still manage it there. Cool. If there's any questions, feel free to type them in. I think Steve's going to keep a lookout in the Zoom, or just, raise your hand and let me know. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about the constructs in the construct library, just because it's an important piece of this. The S3, so basically the construct library represents all the resources that are available on AWS. So this is like a partial picture here. For example, the S3.bucket is a construct in CDK, and that represents on S3 bucket, as you might guess. There's a construct called DynamoDB.table. You can imagine what that's for. Create a table in DynamoDB. So it's very human readable, very friendly constructs. This library is a starting point to create your resources. And one of the big advantages is that you can combine, you can have a composition of services that represent a complex infrastructure. So think about defining your network setup, clusters, databases, all of that can be done with these constructs. And these are maintained by AWS. So you just call them in your code. You'll see how I do that. You don't have to understand if you don't want to. You don't have to dig into them and understand how they came about or what's behind the scenes, unless you're just really curious. They're ready to use with same defaults. So these constructs are organized into 3 different levels. The first one is CloudFormation resources. So these are automatically generated, and they line up one-to-one with classes and AWS resources. So we're going to see some of these in action. They're level 1. Level 2 are AWS constructs. So these are higher level constructs. Think of like having a VPC. When you define a virtual private cloud, it has resources that it depends on. So level 2 is a way to kind of define resources that include other resources, basically. So something like an S3 bucket that might have some policies under it, or a VPC, which might have some subnets under it. So think about resources in resources. Those are very simple still and require very little code to generate complex templates. So we'll be doing that as well today. And then we have level 3. So these are purpose-built constructs. So this is like AWS providing a construct for elastic containers with a load balancer in a VPC. You're getting more complex here. They come from AWS, they come from third parties. So I'm going to show you a website in a little bit that you can go to and actually get some third-party L3 constructs for your CDK. That's above the level that we're doing with this demo today. And you don't always have to use that, but just so you know, because some of the terminology, when you start dealing with that, it's level 3 constructs. And do we want to dig into the pizza while I'm talking? I mean, I don't care. Let's go for it. I mean, yeah, go ahead. Because it smells really good. So oh no, I'm good. So feel free. Yeah, so you have 3 different construct levels, and just kind of understand level 1 and 2 are where we're going to focus mostly today. This is the ecosystem I was talking about. So AWS is a completely open ecosystem. There's a public roadmap for this. It shows which features are prioritized based on customer feedback. So customer feedback, including your feedback. You start using this and you're like, hey, I thought it would do this, but it didn't, or I think this would be a cool feature. That is actively, something that we seek and we're happy to have. So, we're happy to have you contribute to the community as well. And I'll show you a lot of different available resources for that. There are, like I said, a collection of third-party resources. Do you see there the @CDK Patterns, cdkpatterns.com. So that's something that you can check out if you're just curious what all is available with the CDK. Feel free to inspect how others are building their service compositions. Cool. Now, here's the part where I was saying the PDF later might come in handy. There are plenty of resources out there to get you started with CDK, such as the CDK workshop, which is something you can do at your own pace. The GitHub AWS samples, AWS CDK examples. That's what we're going to be taking a look at today. We're going to take my example that's published there, pull it down and use it. And then hopefully you'll be inspired to go check out some of the other ones as well. Feel free to jump on our Gitter channel where we answer your questions about CDK as well. And we'll support you there. And of course, the official AWS documentation is always a good idea. So that's a great place to start as well. All right, so as you're reading through the documentation and the resources, you will see CDK construct stability indicators. So it is a vibrant, always changing environment. So we mark them as stable, developer preview, or experimental. So I think those are fairly self-explanatory, but the ones that we're using in the example today are stable, meaning they should persist across version upgrades and things like that. But some of them that you come across might be developer preview or experimental. Of course, that's even more fun. Feel free to use those as well, but just keep in mind that they may not work exactly the same time every single time that you use them. The GitHub as well, the code that you see in the samples repo is also labeled similarly with these kind of green, blue, orange. Green meaning this should work the first time you run it. If it's not working, it's probably a problem between the keyboard and the and the chair. But if it's experimental, it's likely that just keep an eye on the repo, come back in a couple of days, maybe it'll have an update. So you'll see those stability indexes in a couple of different places. So hopefully you are excited, and it's a lot of talking in a lot of terms, and you're like, okay, what does this thing really do? So we are going to be doing a live demo, which is always super fun. And we're going to be doing image classification. So in other words, take an image, we see what's in it with our eyes. What does recognition, which is one of the AWS services, what does it see? And does it see the same thing? I think it'll be really fun to compare. I have a couple of different images and we're all going to stare at them. And then we're going to analyze this and see what AWS thinks. So in order to lay down that environment to do the analysis, right? There's lots of different ways to do that. You can point and click in the AWS console one step at a time and get some of this set up. Obviously, you could write like a CloudFormation to automate that, but the whole point of today is that we're going to use the CDK. So the first thing you're going to see is just CDK. Like we need to lay down all of the different pieces. Then we're going to analyze the image. So you have to be a little bit patient with the image classification. This is the repo. So again, the link will be available to you afterwards. I'm going to pull it up here in just a moment. You'll see we're at one of the sites I just had on the other slide. So that is one of the sites we recommend that you check out if you want to learn more about this, the GitHub AWS samples. These are vetted and tested by AWS. So in order for it to appear here, it pass muster. Even if it's like a community contribution, it's been checked and for accuracy. Okay, cool. So I think we're ready to head over to the actual repo. So let me get this going just a little bit here. When you go to that website, so you'll see here, GitHub, AWS samples, CDK examples. You'll see some of the languages we just talked about. Does this look familiar? C#, Go, Java, Python, TypeScript, etc. Also, there's a nice README. I'm not going to read it to you, but it talks all about some cool links. I'm a Python fan, if you notice my sticker. So we're going to go to Python, and that's where I made my contribution here to this. All of these titles are available for you. So, keep that in mind if you want to explore. You can tell a lot by the title. This one, for example, is DynamoDB and Lambda. So it's a combination. A lot of these are combination of services. The one we're going to look at is Rekognition, which is the image classification service, Lambda with an S3 trigger. All right. So this is the stability index, nice and green. So this is a pretty safe one to go play with and execute here. And this is just the README. So it's telling you basically how to get started. I've already done some of these steps. So we're going to kind of jump in here more in the middle of things, but just to let you know, I've already, made a directory. I've done the npm install for AWS CDK. The instructions are right here. You literally just follow each one. I've made a Python virtual environment, pretty standard stuff. I've cloned this repo and I've done the pip requirements installation. So we are going to pick up here. We're going to try to synthesize this. So remember my slide earlier, it said the very first thing was CDK init. And you don't see that here. I kind of jumped here straight to synth. The reason for that is because you don't have to run CDK init. I've already got the structure in the GitHub repo. So when you do the clone, you're going to pull down all of the structure that you need. So don't CDK init. That's to start one from complete scratch. You're going to use sample code. So for the sample code, you can skip right to the git clone and then pretty much synthesize and just see what happens. Hopefully you won't have any errors. In this case, I am going to do another thing we discussed right here, CDK bootstrap. So I have some local code on my Mac that I need to get up into my cloud account. And the way it's going to do that is from creating this bucket behind the scenes that I don't know about. And it's going to store things there as like an intermediary hop. So it will do we will need a bootstrap command. And then here's the exciting one we've been talking about, the deploy. So you can see when you're starting with someone's sample, that longer list becomes pretty simple. The synth, the bootstrap, and the deploy. And then when we're finished, there's even a destroy command to clean up. Always a good idea when you're testing out sample code so you don't get charged for those resources. And then the deactivate is just because we're in a Python virtual environment. But let's take a look at how this actually looks. So remember, I've done most of this. I've cloned the repo. So let's look at it here. All right, when I clone the repo, this should look familiar. The README, we just saw that on the GitHub page. The app, the setup, all of these files were at that top level of the GitHub repo we just saw in the web browser. So this is how it will look kind of in your directory structure. And then if you want to, you can pull this up in, sorry about that, don't mean to make you dizzy. pull it up in Visual Studio or, whatever IDE that you want to look at this in. Same files here. See the README, setup.py. So we're going to just take a look in this environment at what some of this is. Starting with the setup.py, pretty standard stuff. The name, right? And description, the author, and the requirements. These are the things you have to run to successfully deploy this infrastructure. So the core, you can see we're going to be doing something with IAM, which so that's AWS permissions, basically things like roles, users, policies fall into that. S3 is your object storage. Lambda, I hope most of you are familiar with Lambda because this was not so much a totally beginner presentation, but Lambda is going to be a serverless, it's a way to run Python code, basically, or another language of your choice in the cloud without having to have first stood up a Linux server or a Windows server or something like that to run it on. So it's a way to just define the code and let AWS provision what it needs to just in those couple of milliseconds, just long enough to run your code. Very cool stuff. That's kind of another presentation, but we're using that here. And then DynamoDB, as the name indicates, that's a database. And we're going to talk about why that's cool in just a second. So the version of Python, there's some other stuff here. That's the setup file. The README we already saw. Remember in GitHub, it had that green thing that said stable at the top. This is how it looks in code. So this is the actual code representation of the README file. So we've already seen that. CDK.json, super simple. Hey, I want to use Python and run app.py. That's like a one-liner. I think we're all on board with that. Okay, we're using Python, we're running app.py. So let's look at what that is. Here's app.py. Again, these are super simple. This is like 5-6 lines of code. So anybody can do this. From the CDK, we're going to import the core. And then we're importing also recognition Lambda trigger stack. And that's coming from recognition Lambda S3 trigger. Do you see that here? So we know that this is important. And basically, that's basically the only other significant directory. So let's look at this one. We see a hint at that Lambda I talked about, but first, we're going to look at the recognition Lambda S3 trigger. We are using IAM, Lambda, DynamoDB. We've already talked about that, but check out how readable this is. So remember, this is going to become CloudFormation, but it's human readable. I'm guessing we can all figure out what this is going to do. So group, a new group called rec group. And the reason you see REK is that's our spelling for recognition. So I shortened it so that I can just identify it in my account if I'm looking right. So we're going to call that rec group, a new user called rec user. This is like pretty standard stuff. And it's Python, which is so cool because, if you're already familiar with the language and you're happy with it, you can use it. Add user to the group. So, this is nice. A bucket, and we're granting the user the ability to read and write. And it just keeps going. The table, the DynamoDB table there. This part here is a little bit fancy. It talks about that Lambda function. So I'm going to name it rec function. But you'll see I had to define a runtime and a handler. This is still not that complicated, but very standard for Lambda. If you look at different examples, you'll see it over and over and over. So the environment here, you can see I'm setting a couple of Lambda environment variables. Nothing to be too concerned about, but if you use Lambda a lot, you'll know that environment variables are cool and they're a thing. So this is how it looks in the CDK. If you want to define environment variables. Then we've got some very simple statements here for permissions. You can see we're adding actions. We're allowing things in policies and roles. I'm trying to keep this kind of high level for y'all. A trigger is just what it sounds like. I want to trigger my function as soon as a file gets dropped into S3. So that's the trigger. So we're going to be doing this. We're going to just put a file there and hope that if everything's defined correctly, the Lambda function should just run. There's no one clicking a button. There's no elves in there, doing, it just happens. And this is how you define that. Super simple. It's just a few lines of code. And look at the end here. I've even made it a little bit fancy with these suffixes. So are there any guesses why I did this? .jpeg spelled out, and .png. I didn't have to do that, but this limits the action to files that contain that suffix. So in other words, if somebody puts a Microsoft Word doc or somebody puts a PDF, don't try to tell me what's in the image. It doesn't make any sense. It's probably going to give an error if Recognition tries to do something to that file. So it just is cleaner this way. It kind of tells the end user what we're expecting to go into the bucket. So this only works for JPEGs and PNG. That's a way of saying that. And then we are going to give some permissions for Lambda to be able to read and write into a database. Do I have to use a database? No, but it's cool. So I'm going to show you all how to do it. This is 67 lines with a bunch of spaces. So, and you can see a lot of it is comments. That's all this is. So literally everything I'm doing is very human readable. There's also this Lambda function. You might say, how do you know what's an image? Because we're doing image recognition. We haven't covered that yet. That's in the Lambda function, but I'm going to head over and do a couple commands first and then come back to the Lambda. That's why I said at first, be patient. We have to lay down the CDK and the permissions, and then we'll do the Lambda. Okay, cool. So let's have some fun. All right, so here we go. CDK synth, remember? That's our command. So it's going to read everything I just showed you, and it's going to say, how do I make this into a CloudFormation template? So let's just look really quick at, let's put it into a file. And let's look at the file. Just so you can see, it is a lovely CloudFormation template. And this does not look like the fun English words that we just saw on the screen. It is, but you can see how things are a little more cryptic. If you write CloudFormation from scratch, everything we talked about looks like this. And so it's literally the same thing, but you can kind of vote, which one would you rather work with? What I mean? So in fact, for fun, we're going to add up how many lines. 476 lines of that CloudFormation came from less than, probably without the comments, 50 lines of Python. So, drop the mic right there. And we actually could read what the Python is doing, whereas CloudFormation is a little bit more cryptic to look at. So that's part of the power of this. And remember, the very first thing we're going to do is bootstrap, because I have a situation where I've got that local file that I need to copy up. So you can see here, it tells you what's going on, but it's more fun to look at it. So this is AWS console. There's over 200 services. We're going to click on CloudFormation. We're going to click in here. Okay, we should see, just give that a second. We'll see that it's provisioning the CloudFormation template. And remember, this is the bootstrap environment. So it's called CDK Toolkit. I didn't tell it that. It comes that way. Obviously, it's trying to make some resources here. If we click on resources, you can see it's trying to make a bucket. That's what I was talking about, that bucket in the back end. So you just kind of let that go. It doesn't take but just a moment. And you can see it's already done. So easy peasy. Your next thing that we're going to do is deploy the actual 476 lines of code. So remember how I told you it's going to spit out some info, and I have the font really large, and that's why it looks ugly. But it's basically saying, hey, are you sure with this? So identity and access management. So these are policies and things that are going to be put into your account. Very important that you understand, especially if you're borrowing code from someone else. So, read this over, understand everything that this is going to be allowed to do, and keep in mind, this is sample code. So in real life, you want to, button that down as much as possible. It's telling you there's going to be some changes, and they may be security related, but you've looked through the code, right? We all look through the 60 lines. We understand what it's doing. So we're going to say, yes, we're good with that. And you can actually get a really good idea here of the success. So you can watch the CLI. You don't ever have to go to the AWS console. for this whole, but you know, it's kind of fun. So it'll tell you everything it's doing there. Like I said, if you want to see here, we look at stacks. Now, in addition to the CDK toolkit, we've got this new one. And obviously that's ours, recognition Lambda S3 trigger stack. So we're like, oh, cool. And you can see it's going to do a whole bunch of stuff and it takes it a while to ramp up. So while that's going on, I wanted to show you the Lambda. So we're going to let that finish. Let's look at that Lambda. This is the Python that's going to tell you what's inside the image. This is how that looks. So pretty standard at first. I know it's a little bit advanced, but Boto 3, OS, and JSON are what we're importing, which is like super short, not a lot of dependencies here. What this does is it takes the name of your S3 bucket that CDK is making for us, not the Bootstrap bucket. It's going to make a bucket just for this activity, for the activity of analyzing images. So it's going to take that bucket name and that file. As soon as a file is dropped in, then we're going to call recognition detect labels. So this API is going to classify what's inside our image. We're telling it we want 10 labels. And of course, this is totally customizable. I just said 10 because it's a nice round number. And I want to see it if it's at least 70% sure what this object is. Now you can have some fun with that number. If you lower it way down, you might get some really funky ideas of what's in the picture, or you could raise it way up if you need to be super sure that it's confident about the selection. But 70% is what we're going to use for today. So the calling detect labels looks just like this. It's basically this one line. The very next thing we're doing is print. We're printing out the labels. Show me what you got. You might say, well, printing it where? Because this is running in the cloud, like print, like. So what that means is print to CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is the standard logging for Lambda. It's where you go to see if you messed up your syntax or, you know, it has a problem. That's where it's going to print. So it's not like an actual printout, but it is in CloudWatch. Just to be special, I'm also going to write that a couple different ways. So we're going to go back to the S3 bucket where we dropped the file, and we're going to put a new object. We're going to make a file that has the results. So that's how this looks. So we're basically going to be getting the labels and putting them in a directory called results. Now keep that in mind because we're going to see it here in just a second. So you drop the image. It's supposed to make a folder called results and put the results into it. We're going to see if that works. Okay, the third way, so we got CloudWatch, we got a new directory in the bucket, is writing it to DynamoDB. Simple, key value, this, that. It's a database, place to put stuff. So we're going to write the labels. We're going to put the name of the image and then put all the labels into the database right here. So that's 3 different ways. And this is important because for projects where you work, you may already have a standard way of doing this, right? So you may say we're a DynamoDB shop, or we're a, you know, different ways or different things are used for this, but CDK is compatible with a bunch more than this, Elasticsearch and everything you can imagine. So this is just an example. All right, cool. So it's time to check on our status. Oh, yay. So create complete, crowd goes wild. Everything's done. And if you look in resources, you should see a whole bunch of goodies. We've got buckets, we've got permissions, we've got everything we asked for. We've got Lambda functions. Yes. All right. So now's the fun part. Let's go to that bucket. And the easiest way to go to one of the resources that you've made, you could just open up your account and go to S3 and try to find it. But if you have been very active in that account, you're going to have hundreds potentially of things or thousands to sift through. Go to the CloudFormation. It's telling you right here, the bucket, and just click it. Huh? So that's the easiest way to get to the resource. And like I said, we're going to drop a file in here. I don't care about the name of the bucket. You don't care because you could specify it, but in this case, it's fine, automatically generated. All we want to do is put something in it, right? So here we go. And the picture we're going to put in there is my cat. Cooper in the flesh. So we did not actually dress him up. No animals were harmed in the making of this. You send their picture to a website and they send you this sofa painting, which proudly hangs in our house. So I have to, so anyway, we're going to see what Recognition thinks about this first and foremost, because I don't know. So we're going to take this image, and if you're not aware, you can drag and drop into your bucket. I don't know if you need that. You don't have to hit the upload button, except once. So you just drag it and drop it and hit upload here. You don't have, that's just another way to do it. So it's going to upload. Let's see, did I hit it? Here it goes. And there it goes, uploading, and done. All right, so we're going to close that. And you might say, well, how fast does all this happen? I just closed it, and there's the results folder. It's done. So, okay, that's cool. So we go into results. There's our file, the file name that we asked for in Lambda. We said we were going to do this, and let's just open it real quick. It's going to be kind of ugly because it's JSON, and I'm looking at it with a little text editor, but for the purposes of demo here, a cat. It's 92% confident it's a cat. I'm like, okay, you go. What else do you think? A pet, a mammal. Let's see what else we have. A Manx. So it's attempting to guess what kind of cat. Maybe he is. I don't know. He's kind of a mutt, so it could be a Manx. But those are the labels that it got back from the cat. And we're going to do another one. So that's the first one. And now I just pulled this off the internet. It's from Shutterstock. I don't know whose house this is, somewhere in the world. But what do you see when you look at this picture? So I'm like, okay, got a couple things. You know, you might start thinking, okay, so get some things in your mind, and then we're going to let Recognition tell us what it sees. And remember, we said 10 things, max 10. Okay, are you ready? All right, so we're going to go back to the bucket, top level of the bucket, and we're going to slide this object in here and hit upload. Here it comes, all done, close it, go back to results. Okay, now I'm going to look at this result another way. I'm not going to pull it up the same way. I could, but since we wrote to a database, I wanted to go try that. So we're going to look. So it's done. Now remember, how do we get to the resources that we just created? Go to CloudFormation, look at the resources. We want the DynamoDB table. So I'm in this column over here. I'm looking for DynamoDB table. It created a bunch of stuff. Here it is. Just click it. Again, it has a random name. We could have named it whatever we want. And look at the items. Okay, so these are the entries in the DynamoDB table. So for the second item, car, did you pick that up? Grass, plant, interesting, outdoors, housing, building, yard, tire, vegetation, wheel. Car has wheels. So that's the top 10. And of course, if I change my function to say, give me 25, it'll give me 25. If I lower the confidence, who knows? Or if I increase it. Now, I told that Python to only write the item here. Remember, JSON gave us a bunch more stuff, the confidence, the percent confidence, the bounding box that draws, there's a bunch more stuff returned, but depending on your use case, maybe a retail website or something like that, you might not want all that stuff. You might just want the item label right there like that. So that's one thing we did. And then the other place to look was Cloud. Remember I said the logs, we're going to CloudWatch. So find the Lambda function right here, rec function, that's us. And all you do is go into the function, and then you don't have to know a lot about it. We're not going to look at any code. We're going to go to monitor. There's the logs, and we're going to view the logs in CloudWatch. Because I said print, remember in our function, I said print. So let's see what it did. So here's the log stream for the function. All right, so here was image 1 and here's image 2, and this is what the print statement did. So it could be you don't want to do Dynamo. You don't need to write it out to S3. You just want this. I mean, the sky's the limit as far as where you put the results. But those are examples of the different ways that you can pull the information back. So pretty cool. And we could sit here and upload images all day long, but I think you get the general idea. So I'm going to go to, don't get dizzy. Sorry about that. Ask for questions, because I have 2 more fun things to show you real quick. Well, not demo, but just talk about, unless you have questions. No? Okay. This is a frequently asked question that I wanted to go over. People say, well, you provision stuff in your one AWS account. You know, at my company, we have a lot of different accounts for dev, test, prod, something like that. How would this look? You know, each one of those accounts has a different, maybe a different way to log into it, et cetera. So there is a credential plugin. So how this works is CDK determines the environment for the stack, looks for credentials to use against that environment. If your default credentials match and it can log you in, it uses those. Otherwise, it loads the plugins and will go fetch credentials for other accounts. So it is possible to use a plugin and deploy to more than one account with CDK. So that's pretty powerful. And it's the plugin URL is right there, a blog that talks about it and has a link and everything. So you can read more about it there. It uses roles, cross-account roles. That is like you can either read only or you could allow read write, but that is regulated that way. So just so you know, it's called Credential Plugin. And the other one is CDK Terraform. And I just wanted to bring this up because CloudFormation is not the only thing that CDK can output. It is possible to write in CDK like we saw in Visual Studio and have the output be Terraform, which is another popular tool that's used for automation. So I have some links here. It is an actual collaboration between AWS CDK and the HashiCorp Terraform teams to create the project, and it's available in TypeScript, Python, Java, C#, and Go coming soon. So a lot of the same languages. So there's a place to go check it out, and you can also see some samples there. All right, awesome. And that was it. That's all I had. I hope you enjoyed seeing all of the image analysis and know that we did that all with less than like 50 lines of human readable code. Pretty cool. And that GitHub repo has a lot of examples. So you certainly don't have to use Python. But feel free to do that. The only thing I will caution you on is cleanup. Right, because remember, I have all those resources kind of hanging out now in my account. It's always good practice to clean up. If you are using pure CloudFormation, you would go there and you would delete your stack. But CDK takes care of that for you. So you just destroy it this way. And it will say, are you sure? Of course. And this will go through and destroy. Now, a caveat. We put things into the S3 bucket. We put data into the DynamoDB table. So therefore, it is not just going to go destroy that, because other people may have put things in there too. It's very dangerous, you know, to assume. So there are some things that you manually have to clean up, namely the S3 bucket and the DynamoDB. But things like the permissions and the user it created, the group it created, all of that is going to be cleaned up here. And if you want to follow it another way, of course, everything is just CloudFormation on the back end. So if I refresh this, it's already gone. The only one we have left now is that Bootstrap. Bootstrap is fine. It's just a little bucket. It's not going to be significant on your bill, you know, so you can leave it for next time. If you forget and someone else tries to bootstrap your environment, it will tell you that it's already been bootstrapped. So it will literally say, if someone else comes along and says, oh, I want to run this, let me bootstrap. It should say, yeah, you're already bootstrapped, no changes required. Now, if I go and remove that bucket for the bootstrap and start cleaning stuff up, then you'll have to do it again. But yes, always good practice to take inventory of your account when you're finished and make sure things are gone. So